For everyone with an interest in NASH or more broadly, fatty liver disease, Surf's Up. Part 1 of Season 4, Episode 22, our coverage of Friday's FDA Advisory Committee meeting on obeticholic acid in F3 NASH fibrosis, starts now.
Today, on a special episode of Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
I heard the demand to put it into the patient's hand and make an informed decision. Allow physicians to inform their patients to make an informed decision. This is something that I would do with my patient. I don't think I'm going to have this drug in my hand to make my patient make an informed choice. And that is what hurts me tonight.
I thought they were building a strong case to approve a drug that hit this efficacy standpoint without creating really troubling safety issues.
I don't think it is good faith by the agency to throw shade, doubt, questions, whatever you'd like to call it, on the significance of the endpoint at the point of an advisory committee. That is the endpoint that you negotiated, that you agreed on. The time for changing it is when people are designing their trials and conducting their trials, not at an ADCOM.
I'm concerned that the financial community is going to generalize this. Another NASH drug goes down, and everybody's going to get penalized. And I think that would be the wrong message. I think the right message would be that the committee said today pretty clearly that an efficacious drug, even if this is the definition of efficacy, and this is not a high bar in virtually any disease I know of, but a drug even with this definition of efficacy, if it has a safety profile where I trust doctors to be able to manage it, I'll go with it because I understand the patient needs.
On Friday, May 19th, the FDA Advisory Committee held a day-long session to review the accelerated NDA for obeticholic acid in F3 fibrosis. Join hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Jörn Schattenberg, pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green, and Global Liver Institute founder and CEO Donna Cryer for part 1 of our discussion of this pivotal meeting, right now, on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
Hi, this is Roger Green, executive producer and co-host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. As we all know by now, last Friday, the FDA Advisory Committee met to discuss the new drug application for obeticholic acid for F3 fibrosis in NASH patients and voted 1-15 to the negative on the question of approving the drug at this time. For all intents and purposes, this should signal that OCA will not be approved under accelerated approval. Jörn Schattenberg and Donna Cryer joined me Friday evening at the end of the meeting to record a conversation sharing our thoughts on the ADCOM decision. On Friday afternoon and throughout the weekend, I was unfortunately unable to connect with any of our U.S.-based key opinion leader semi-regulars, most of whom were traveling outside the country, to record an interview on this topic. As a result, we are releasing the conversation with Donna, Jörn, and me this morning as Episode 22, Part 1. Throughout the day, I will work to schedule one or more U.S. KOL interviews, and if successful, we will release these tonight as Part 2. Also, we have Stephen Harrison as our guest today, and while the topic is to discuss his recent Nature Medicine article on challenges and opportunities in NASH drug development, I'm sure our conversation will make a detour into the ADCOM meeting and the decision. By the time we've completed these 3 pieces, Part 1, Part 2, and the conversation with Stephen, I am confident we will have provided a multi-perspective look at what certainly felt like a dark day for our community, most of all the patients who need to persevere longer without an approved agent for their disease. And now, let's start Part 1, my discussion with GLI founder and CEO Donna Cryer and my esteemed co-host and hepatology key opinion leader, Jörn Schattenberg.
And with that, let's move on to the episode.
So I should tell you, nobody in the States was able to join me, but Jörn is with me in Germany where it's almost 11 o'clock, and Donna is in Scotland, and she was able to join me where it's 10. I don't think this is exactly the day anybody expected. I'm going to use the least judgmental language I can and say that Intercept and OCA just took a thrashing in front of FDA Advisory Committee. Intercept, in some ways, not so much. People respected the quality of their work and of their research, but the questions that didn't get answered and the answers that existed for some of the ones that did just weren't good enough to get even close to the finish line in the minds of people who really wanted to do so. So that's my 30-second take. Let's get an initial reaction from each of you folks, and then we'll go through what do we think happened and what do we think it means for some of the different stakeholders. Donna, since Jörn and I have agreed that your people were the strongest thing in the meeting today, why don't you go first?
Thank you so much. I really am proud of the NASH patient community. I think that we have a diversity of experiences with our liver disease. You had a mix of transplant recipients, cancer survivors, people who had NASH that they were able to reverse. So it was we were diverse diverse age, in gender, in ethnicity. We were African American, Hispanic, Caucasian. We were a lawyer, a CPA, an engineer. I just really want to commend the conversations and the consensus that we had in this community to come to the points that we were making, which is really that there's a serious unmet need, which is what the regulation, required. That was met. The endpoint was met. This would have been the first drug, not the last. The benefit and risk assessment should belong to the patients. That was not listened to except for by the patients. I think despite the results, I'm very proud of the NASH patient community, and I think the entire field should be as well.
Agreed. Two quick thoughts on that. Number one, I'm mindful of the fact that you came out of the end of NASH tag when everybody was high-fiving each other on all the good things that were going to happen this year, and you said not so fast. There's a lot of regulatory science and regulatory work to be done.
This is what I was concerned about.
This is basically what you said might happen, and it happened. And there are times when it really stinks to be right. This might be one of them. And the other thing is you had tremendous diversity, except for you had 3 Viliatis. Now, Viliati is a very, very small subsample of the U.S. population, but each of them was fantastic. So I think that was a good choice as well.
They were amazing. They were the MVPs, and they represented 3 distinct experiences as the patient, a caregiver, and the larger family, and made really fantastic points about how this is a family disease, and the impact is on across the entire family.
As a guy who spends a lot of time with his granddaughter, Gina's comments about her son and her son's grandpop just totally blew me away. Jörn, reactions?
Oh, yeah. Good to see you both. And I have a lot of thoughts going through my mind. I'm trying to sort my thoughts. I heard strong patient voices. I heard that this is a disease that's not going to go away, not through physical exercise or diet or nutrition. This is a disease we need an approved drug for. And all patient testimony spoke to that. Actually, the patient representative voted yes. And she was the only one, but she voted yes on all questions. And there is need. So that's my first impression. And congratulations to the patients, Donna, from my perspective. I heard hepatologists struggle with the ratio of efficacy over safety. I hear fear with them of making the wrong call. I heard the demand to put it into the patient's hand and make an informed decision. Allow physicians to inform the patients to make an informed decision. This is something that I would do with my patient if I had a drug that is not very safe, but could have a benefit. And I would monitor that patient and I would treat to achieve benefit and make a radical decision to stop treatment if I think he's not experiencing benefit. The way this went, I don't think I'm going to have this drug in my hand to make my patient make an informed choice. And that is what hurts me tonight. I do hear, and as a physician, I don't want to put my patients at risk, but I want to be in the position to offer them something. And I think we passed on that opportunity.
Okay, so here's mine. And I'm going to try to think a bit like the committee, not because I like doing that, but because part of this is about what happened today and part of this is about context. And what happened today is what you two just talked about, but context is what I want to focus on for a minute. I heard the hepatologists wisely point to where gaps existed, some of which were gaps I frankly hadn't thought about. The idea that goes, we have NITs, but we haven't proved what NITs mean about NASH. Now, that's a fine point, but Dilly was a less fine point. And in the hands of Jörn, as I was listening to Manal Abdelmalik's testimony, I said to myself, in the hands of Manal, and Jörn, I thought of you, in the hands of you 3, I trust this drug. Okay. In the hands of a lay hepatologist or gastroenterologist even, or primary care doc worse, on the suburbs of Topeka, Kansas, who has a patient craving the drug and doesn't know how to manage it, you don't know what's going to happen. So what I heard was, we appreciate the need for therapy. Anybody that hits their efficacy endpoint, even if we don't think it's a particularly robust endpoint, that's good enough as long as we can be confident about safety. And the clear safety problems with the drug, the exceptional monitoring solution that they proposed, which is hard to visualize people outside of an academic center really being able to manage, and what they didn't know about NITs and we didn't show them well enough, I think put them in a position where they felt that for every patient that they were putting into Jörn's hands who would be treated well, or Manal's, or frankly, most of theirs. An awful lot of patients would wind up going in places where their treatment wasn't going to get adequately managed based on the tools we had right now. I think that's important because next up, and I don't just mean the one next up, I mean the 3 or 4 next up, are all going to be drugs with, for very different reasons, far, far superior safety profiles that have demonstrated in clinical trials that they will be able to meet or exceed the efficacy that Boca showed today. So I'm concerned that the financial community is going to generalize this. Another NASH drug goes down and everybody's going to get penalized. And I think that would be the wrong message. I think the right message would be that the committee said today pretty clearly that an efficacious drug, even if this is the definition of efficacy, and this is not a high bar in virtually any disease I know of, but a drug even with this definition of efficacy, if it has a safety profile where I trust doctors to be able to manage it, I'll go with it because I understand the patient need, and those people broke my heart today, Donna.
You're absolutely spot on. And I think that is this message that this is not an overall indictment of NASH drug development by any means. But I hit 3 points. So I think you both are absolutely right that the committee, and I have been on this committee before, making these very difficult decisions. And I do respect, I think there was a lot of soul searching but they were thinking a lot about how you scaled up the risks that they were seeing. And there was a fear reflected. But it was rather striking to me that it was as if none of the key opinion leaders or even the patients who'd been very involved, it was as if we hadn't spoken. It was as if Arun Sanyal and Rohit Loomba and Chris Cowley had not presented earlier in the day about how to contextualize this, about what they were seeing, about how they felt that this drug could be safely put into the armamentarium. And they didn't listen to patients, even those of us who have had all of those side effects. And I really want to appreciate the candor of the patient rep who was like, I live with these things that you're talking about all the time currently, and I'm able to go along. And so even though they were in their, they leaned to their own understanding, which the Bible tells us not to do, and which I know is what the committee does. But it really, at some point, it was as if leaders in the field had not spoken to this committee at all.
Donna, let's give them a heads up. And their role was on the sponsor side this night, right? Well, that's, of course, an issue because there's the sponsor side, which is viewed as sponsor, and then there's the expert side, which a lot of them are not as deeply as Arun and Rohit into the topic on the voting members. That is a need because they should be independent, but that's, of course, a risk because they might not. It's more of a maybe belly decision. I'm not sure you even use that word, but it's a common German saying. You decide from your belly because on the basis of what's on
a gut, from your gut,
a gut feeling. There you are.
But you're in the right body part, just a different noun. Go ahead.
So again, it brings back to they met the primary endpoint. There was some discussion around the what does that mean? Is the number over placebo important? And I would say that's not the right point because if you improve there, and the sponsor made that point, there are other NITs going the right way. And maybe that wasn't emphasized by them enough. I agree with you. They should have nailed that down. More than 10%, there's more than a 10% benefit to patients.
Also, I find it problematic, and I've been consistent in saying this, that you can't at this point decide that the endpoint is not meaningful. I don't think it is good faith by the agency to throw shade, doubt, questions, whatever you'd like to call it, on the significance of the endpoint at the point of an advisory committee. That is the endpoint that you negotiated, that you agreed on. The time for changing it is when people are designing their trials and conducting their trials, not at an ADCOM. I think it's disingenuous and I think it's bad form to be sort of changing the goals at this point in time. And I do appreciate the members of the committee who finally did bring the discussions back to let's answer the question that we're asked, or let's acknowledge that they met the endpoint. You're there to do a very specific thing. This is not sort of a wide-ranging free-for-all at this point. You're asked to do some very specific things, and so I really want to give kudos to those who understood the assignment.
Although, everybody's there is different. One thought is picture's worth 1,000 words, and the picture that sunk this was early. It was that Dilly slide with the line that looked like the World Trade Center.
I agree.
That's why he put it in the beginning. I'm not sure that was the right thing. It was kind of,
The word I was going to use is demagogic. To me, demagoguery at its most effective is when you take a thing that's true and make it represent a thing that's false. And that's exactly, to me, what that slide was. You looked at it and you said, oh, God, they can't approve this. But then you thought about the slide. And when the question came back later about, well, is it fair to compare Dilly for a drug treating sick livers to Dilly for a drug treating something else? No, of course it's not. But the problem is a lot of people say, all right, fine. So now the gap between those lines is 1 unit high and 1 is 111 units high. How much of that 111 to 1 gap am I going to take apart because these are sick livers. Well, should I split it in half? It's still 60 to 1. Should I split it in 3/4? It's still 30 to 1. That's what made that picture so demagogic.
I wish that there was an opportunity to engage in dialogue with the ADCOM, because this was something that the patients had discussed, and none of us were, overly surprised that there's liver damage in patients who have liver damage. I recall the time when I was part of FDA, basically, and a new website for patients with diabetes was created, and the staffer was really scared because she got critical feedback from someone because it didn't have, XYZ type of information for diabetes. And I was like, that's not the purpose of this. This is for drug development, If she wants, basic, but only a patient could give her permission to tell another patient to go somewhere else. And so I think they needed more dialogue from the patients to say, as we discussed in our patient-focused drug development meeting and went into much more detail about what our expectations were, what types of liver damage was expected, appropriate, manageable, all of these things, I think that could have helped them be more comfortable with it. Or even if they voted the same way, they would have had a deeper understanding and permission to vote another way if they were so inclined. If they were only doing it because, wow, it would make us sort of look bad if we treat all these patients the same, and it was more of a fear or a reputation or a PR rather than an actual clinical concern. So I think we could have centered it on the right thing.
I want to come back to that in a second, but first I want Jörn to react to anything and everything he wishes since he's headed towards fever dream sleep. The time to have tackled that dilly slide was in the Intercept presentations. And you get two choices, and I'm asking Donna as a PR person and Jörn as a academic hepatologist who might someday be in a semi-regulatory position like this one. Intercept makes the decision to say, hey, we got this. Would they have been better off saying, we understand this is a real challenge, and this is what we have right now. We think it's good enough, and we want to work with the agency to make it better. Which way do you go on that?
I was aghast that the chair of the DILI committee, that Paul, almost didn't get a chance to speak at all. And you're confronted by a music major who does celiac disease is going to tell, like, the world-renowned expert on DILI that he doesn't understand DILI. That was quite astounding to me. But I definitely think the choice to have put him as a core part of the presentation, might have made it stronger.
So in retrospect, what the taste that remains is there's a DILI issue. That was a little bit surprising to me from the presentation. And let's face it, the mitigation plan that was suggested, like 2 weekly lab checks, is not realistic. So I think that was not the right choice. The mitigation must be at a different level. And some of the questions towards what are the intrahepatic concentrations kind of went that way, trying to understand better what happened in those patients. Now, we're not going to get intrahepatic drug levels in clinical practice, or even the clinical trial can't do that. So, but it speaks to the trying to understand what has happened in those patients. And some patients with severe underlying liver disease will progress, and they do not perform well on that drug. So that needs further explorations. I think the thinking of the company was, or is, they met the primary endpoint and will put a mitigation strategy and plan and will manage. But the concerns is, as you said, to roll this out in the broader community is a challenge.
We all get stuck fighting the last war sometimes. And I think this was that they took what they didn't prove last time and set out to prove it. Some very smart academics, some world-class smart academics, expressed months of bravado about how this looked like a slam dunk. Now, that got on the wrong side of Donna from day one, and we talked about it right when it happened the first time. But I think that it was incumbent on Intercept, frankly, to view this as the first submission and say, okay, where are all the places that as a first submission this might trip up, and take each of those equally seriously. And I think you're right. I think putting the delegate director in the middle of the your presentation, vitally important.
He didn't get enough time.
No,
clearly he is the person to answer this.
I thought he and Manal, Manal contributed so much in her brief comments about what is manageable and how it's managed and how to contextualize the different side effects that I really want, to applaud her participation in the meeting.
I agree. I thought she was fantastic. But then again, like I say, that goes to the place that goes, when Manal says, we know how to handle this, to a room full of people who consider themselves top hepatologists who don't know how to handle this, that might make we a very select group.
Well, I think that it's one of the things, as I thought about this in the same way that I would prosecute a case when I was back at the Justice Department of Criminal Division, and think about the strengths and weaknesses of the case and, getting in front of damaging evidence. So this is, very much the same way. And so I think you see across, the patient comments, we tried to anticipate and shore up places that would be poked at. And it is why specifically, because I had submitted comments, some weeks ago, and I wrote the comments that I spoke in real time and listening to the conversation. And it's why I felt that the need to say that the patient community, was aligned with the appropriate selection of patients, to let the committee and the agency know that we were not a patient community that was like, we want it for everybody. We were very serious in understanding the limitations of this first compound, the value of it in specific cases, and would work alongside physicians and health plans and others to get this to the right patients. Unfortunately, that also was a seed that went on, unfertile ground.
So let me ask a question. Jörn said he's on questions now because he's moving for his incipient brain death for the night. Question number one: If you're helping next up or second next up get ready, what are the lessons you take out of today that you would share with them?
I think that everybody should march on FDA and change those endpoints if they're going to be changed. I'm sorry, I'm going to let you answer.
The major theme here was efficacy over safety. The efficacy over safety ratio, and this was one DILI over 10% efficacy. There's a lot of subsequent safety issues, gallstones, pruritus, LDL. All of these, I think, could have been managed. I think the DILI was really the knockout here today, or the patient that underwent transplant in the end. So if you're developing a drug in this indication, make sure to paint that ratio of efficacy over safety.
I agreed. And then number two is the lesson from today is you will get derailed on your odd case. So ask yourself, what is the worst thing the FDA knows about you, and how do you address it proactively and in context?
I mean, I think the field still, there were some questions and issues that were applicable to everyone across the field, including going back to the point of how far non-invasive technologies have evolved and what are the appropriate uses of them. The gap between requirements of biopsies and then people using the weaknesses of biopsy itself and the lack of ability to interpret it, all the sampling errors, it's a double negative. So they're saying that the biopsies aren't good and your NITs aren't good. And so what do you want us to do? Because people are dying. And so I need the agency to work with and then find some definitive roadmap and rules that we will actually go by, and then explain that to the committee, and everybody needs to stick to it, whatever it is at the time of a particular review. So I think we need a wholehearted conversation with FDA so that we understand what it is that we are being asked to do, so that when we do it, we get credit for it.
Okay, so a question that goes along with that. How much of this do you think is an artifact of a 2015 trial design? You wouldn't have some of these issues now because Madrigal and Inventiva and Novo are all, and Akero and Viking and Bio89, and I'm forgetting anybody, please forgive me, but everybody who's stepping up to 3 right now has a much smarter trial design based on years of thinking, none of which were in this. A little bit of it was in the reanalysis.
Right, but they learned it on the back of Intercept. And so how much is too much for one company and one program to have to carry, I think is the question of fairness. I think they should be judged on the rules that were applied to them at the time that they were actually doing the work. And so to apply today's standards of trial design on something that was agreed upon some years ago is fundamentally unfair.
I'm not sure about the trial design, but there's some comments that during the meeting that kind of left a sore taste with me. One was of the moderator commenting on that placebo seems to be going up all the time. Everybody saw the numbers, but the neutrality was kind of given up, I think, by some negative comments on that. And anyways, maybe that's just my feeling.
No,
it's just like...
I had the same reaction to that comment.
And again, I'd like to congratulate Intercept for what they've done up until this hearing here. I mean, there's going to be a tough decision on how this is going to move on for the compound, obviously, with all that negative comment and the few yes votes they got.
Jörn, as a forecaster, I don't think that's the biggest problem, which I'll come to in a second, but I want to ask Donna something first. Donna, I know there's a JD after your name on the screen. I think that means you're a lawyer. You might have been in court a few times.
I am. I have.
Apropos of your statement about the trial designs, I want you to tell me how this statement works. A judge turns to jury and says, I'd like you to disregard everything you've heard in the last 3 years about what good form is. That's the problem. You can't do it.
Right.
You can't do it.
You can't do that.
And it's horribly unfair to Intercept.
Yes, we shall enact no ex post facto laws, part of the Constitution. Yeah. So what leaves a bad taste in my mouth? To me, it wasn't about winning or losing, but it was about fundamental fairness. It was about, as I've talked about consistently, having a regulatory partner in this that is trustworthy and faithful and clear and consistent. And we don't have one. And so I think that those pose larger problems to the field than the science.
And in no particular order, I agree with you about 80%. Okay. They've now made it clear we're not going to get one. The Kumbaya moment, the hashtag 2022 is over. Right? Because, in fact, your guys did an amazing job of singing Kumbaya today. And they said, yeah, well, that's interesting. We're going to protect you the way we know how. And that's not to give you what you want.
Well, they absolutely patronized the patient rep. They said, thank you for your perspective. And I was like, wow. Okay. And then just went on.
Were you on the episode where we were talking about voices, votes, and seats at the table, where I was talking about that?
No, that was my vice president, Jeff McIntyre, who made that excellent point.
Yes, so I'll repeat where I go with that, right? What do you want? I want a seat at the table. Easiest way to get a seat at the table is to make the chairperson happy that they've got you there by giving them what they want. But if I do that, then in fact, I'm denying the reason I want to be there. So I want a voice. Well, if I give you a voice, but I mock it while I give it to you, is that a voice? I want a vote. Well, if you have a vote, you could lose. What do you really want here? And I think you came back to what I want is partnership. Right. You know what I want is a relationship?
Right. There have been things that we've consistently asked of the agency that they have not given, that they haven't changed their minds on, developed their thinking on, deferred to. There was one committee member who spoke about the agency of people, of his patients, and his concern for that. And then I think that's what we have wanted the FDA, because, you do the work. You say, well, you need to do a patient-focused drug development meeting. And so we did that. And so we formalized the patient voice and surveys and things. And still, repeatedly throughout this, what struck me was the agency injecting their interpretation, their preference for the benefit and risk in the place of the unified voice of the patient community.
So exhaustion leads to despair. So I want to step back from despair for a minute because I know you guys are tired and I want to wrap it up soon. If you're next up, did you learn enough today to make it better next time? Like to get to the right result?
Yeah, I think so. I think Madrigal is very different, as Jörn said. They have a different efficacy, different safety profile. I think, given all the comments today, I think there will be a different comfort level about putting this on the market, and we will be there as well to make sure that they understand.
Let's recap. From my side, the agency recognized the high unmet need, and I think the patient voiced this strongly. We need a drug to treat this disease and prevent death. Okay. They agreed to the endpoint. I was a little disappointed by the experts on the panel not strongly enough voicing that improvement in fibrosis is a relevant endpoint. And I think that's when Donna said maybe Professor Arun Sanyal should have been there, because he would have voiced that. But the people on the committee didn't believe enough in it. Okay. They may not have enough exposure to it. Let's face it. Reduction in fibrosis is an endpoint that's beneficial for the patient. Quality of life, outcomes, this is what we want to study. It's a surrogate endpoint that's reasonably likely to predict survival. I think the agency said that. I was a little bit disappointed by the experts not emphasizing that. But that's something that also came across. And if you're in drug development and you go down that path and you improve fibrosis, and then your ratio of efficacy over safety is intact, you're going to have a drug.
We'll talk about it with Stephen on Monday when we go over their paper. The research community, I think, needs to do a little better, a little faster. We already are trying to do exactly right, which is make the case for NITs and everything that NIT is. I I happen to believe that one of the reasons the experts were questioned efficacy was because they were trying in their mind to dial down the efficacy ratio, so they weren't looking at all these patients saying, yeah, we know this drug works, it's not going to hurt a lot of people, we're not approving it.
It's disingenuous for them to say, 8 million people were not going to get treated like in any time frame with this or any drug. So we can barely identify and diagnose a handful of people and get them into the right clinical settings. So, that's not a realistic. I think one of the things, patients are pragmatic. We're trying to make all of this reality-based, whether with ICER or with FDA. It just seems that, we really need everybody to get out of the hypothetical and really speak with clear messaging, succinctly on the facts as we know them, and to be able to move forward with what we know and what we can do today. So people aren't told, as one of the committee, members admitted what he tells his patients, you should lose weight and go on a walk.
Yeah.
Because that's where we are right now. We're going to go on a walk. So that's what the committee and the FDA left the NASH patients with right now until
somebody said that go on a walk, and I thought I couldn't. Yeah. It struck by disbelief. I have my whole clinic.
What you should do next year for by that standard, what you should be doing next year for International NASH Day is sponsor a hike. Get all the NASH patients' minds to go on a hike together.
We are encouraging everybody to step up to NASH, and I did run up the steps here on the Royal Miles. But NASH patients, it's not going to solve it. Exactly. So it's nice to do. But what we need, particularly for patients at F2, F3, and beyond, is a pharmacological therapy, multiple pharmacological therapies to deal with the heterogeneity of their diseases.
We agree. And I do believe, I think I'm with Jörn, bottom line, behind a lot of really interesting, I'm going to say, questions and comments and perspectives today, take a walk. I thought they were building a strong case to approve a drug that hit this efficacy standpoint without creating really troubling safety issues. Now, we'll figure that out next up because resmetirom does not appear to have really troubling safety issues that we can see. So then we'll find out if that's right or if they will find something to make a really troubling safety issue out of it. You don't know until you see it. Any other comments before we let you guys go to sleep?
I would just say, to reinforce that my expectation as a taxpayer of our federal government is to deal with the case before them, not with what has gone in the past, what may come in the future, but to understand and do the assignment that they had today. And I don't believe they did.
Jörn, closing thought?
We've come a long way in the field of drug development, and we have a strong and agreed endpoint that will be met by additional compounds. So we'll succeed to get a drug.
My hat is off and my heart goes out to Intercept. These guys have played a really heroic role. And the real issue with continuing this trial to completion is that, frankly, we know the drug's not that good. And if they continue it another 3 years and then get it analyzed and approved, it'll be third drug to market. And this drug coming to market third isn't going to make any money. In the same sense that we understood why NGM pulled aldafermin, even though we thought that was a good drug, I understand why they wouldn't take this to end. It would just be for science. And in that regard, they've been really bold. They've really worked it. And it's a shame this is what it came to. But I salute them. We said this when the first one went down, that Mark Prozanski got out in front of this in 2002. This is the end of a 20-year journey for that company. That's tough. That's just tough. I think they probably made it easier for the next guy, but I know that's not what they set out to do. So, Donna, we will talk more about how to do better regulatory science, since you were proved right on this one. Jörn, we will talk more about how to strengthen the clinical trial process starting on Monday with Stephen. So everybody get some rest this weekend. I'll see you Monday afternoon. Donna, Jörn, thanks for coming on so late at night.
Join us later today when Roger will have 1 or 2 interviews with U.S.-based key opinion leaders. Have any questions for the surfers? You can send them to surfing NASH.com, and we will answer on the podcast or the website.